Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is our first webinar in a series of webinars to help all of our clients through these challenging times, and with our best ideas of how you can use your software, your Counterpoint software, to be able to help your business thrive through this time. So again, welcome. The one thing, we do have quite a number of attendees, so unfortunately we won't be able to take questions as we go along. But if you do have a question, feel free to email rapidcares@rapidpos.com, and we'll try to get to those questions just as soon after the webinar as we can. But my name is Bart McCleskey. I'm the president of Rapid, and I'm being joined by...
Hi, everybody. This is Sean Novak. I'm your virtual CIO at Rapid.
Thanks, Sean. And so we're going to be spending the next half hour going through some ideas on how to how to use your system to manage your inventory better. And specifically, what we mean when we say that is, how do we identify what we're out of stock of, so that we can get back in stock of it? And that's a little more complicated than it initially seems. It's the important part of that is we're out of stock of items that we're actually selling, not out of stock of items that we haven't carried for 3 years. So we'll show you how to do that. Then we'll talk a little bit about overstock and understock, how to identify those situations and to address those. And certainly we know that COVID has been very interesting, and that it's altered people's buying habits. And so we have been overstocked on things that we didn't expect to be, and understocked on other things that we didn't that we need to address. We're going to just really briefly hit on auto replenishment and inventory detail, and then talk about some next steps. So that's our agenda. Let's dive right into it. And the place where we want to start is, what is inventory control? What does that mean? Well, to us, it means you've got limited dollars to invest in your inventory. If we had unlimited dollars, we wouldn't have to worry about this so much. You've got a limited space in your store for inventory. And so what we want to do is maximize your customer satisfaction and maximize your profits by making sure that you're in the right lines of merchandise, by making sure that if you're choosing to be in a line of merchandise, that you have the depth of assortment that you need, and also to make sure that you have the quantity on hand for each item that you have in your assortment that is appropriate. So those are the 3 things that work together in order to make sure that we have inventory properly under control. Are we carrying the right things? Are we carrying enough of those things that we're in? And do we have the quantity on hand that we need available? Now, we get a question all the time of people say, hey, can't I do this with just a quick walk around the store? And the answer is absolutely yes. That is the advantage of being a small and medium-sized retailer, is that you can get out into your store and walk the floor and see what's missing and see what's overstocked. We're not suggesting you stop doing that. But what we do want to allow you to do is to add a little bit of science to your art, to get some hard facts in black and white out of reports out of Counterpoint to help guide you. And the reason we think this is important is your eye is biased. You may not know it and you may not feel it every day when you're doing things, but your eye is biased. For example, if you have a particular passion for archery, and you're looking through archery magazines of new available stock, you're more likely, since you have a passion for that, to order some of those new things into your store, even though you might be overstocked currently. The other reason we want to do it, and we know we have some buyers on the call today, buyers want and need objective measures. They need ways to say, hey, is my stock on hand about where it ought to be? And so we think these things are important. And then on the last reason we want to introduce some science is, I know as a business owner, when I'm having to make some really hard decisions, that it's a lot easier to make those hard decisions if I have some facts in black and white to back up the reason that those things need to be done. And so we're going to start with the most fundamental thing, and that's to identify things that are out of stock. Customers are sensitive to out of stock because of the toilet paper and the paper towel situation. And so we want to make sure that our stores are doing all we can to make sure that we're in stock. Now, all the reports we're going to look at today are built using the merchandise analysis report. This is the most powerful report in Counterpoint, and we're going to show you at least 5 or 6 different ways to run this report, this one report, to get different answers to different questions. That report is found in inventory, reports, merchandise analysis, And the key to it, because as I said, where there's lots of different ways to run it, the key to this report is getting comfortable with the configuration of it. And so with that as an introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Sean, and he's going to walk us through the configuring for the first merchandise inventory report. So Sean, I'm going to let you take the screen away and be my guest.
All right, thank you very much, Bart. So, yep, I am going to share my screen and just walk through a high-level view of the merchandise analysis and the easiest and my favorite scenario, what are we out of stock on that we do sell regularly? Get my screen up there. Okay, just a recap of exactly where Bart left off. To get to this report, you're going to navigate to Inventory, Reports, and Merchandise Analysis Report. So at a high level view, the first thing I want to discuss is that the merchandise analysis report consists of three primary criteria here. We have our parameters, which would be what type of report are we running, columns, which is what data do we want to display on the report, and then we have two tabs to filter that data. Include data, exclude data, only specific data, and so on. In the case of out-of-stock inventory report, we're going to want to analyze this at an item level. Category doesn't help us. We want item level details of what we're out of stock on. I am going to print all results, and I will actually organize this. Rank by is our sort, and I'll say sort it by the quantity sold. I am going to base my sales criteria on the previous 12 months in this case. And then over here to the right, these are the columns the report will display, which we can select manually under select columns, or I can select the one that gets me the closest right off the bat. These are pre-configured options that we already have. So for example, inventory performance gives me quantity on hand, quantity on purchase orders, etc. It defaults these columns for me. So at my next tab, there they are. And then I can pick and choose what I want, add or remove. For example, if I'm looking at things that are completely out of stock, weeks on hand is not going to be useful because I have none in stock. So I'm going to get rid of the ones I do not need, just double clicking to remove them. I might decide, hey, I like quantity sold. I'm going to bump that up higher in the list. And then now that I've freed up some columns, I'll also say, well, I always like seeing my sales numbers on there as well. So I'm looking at my quantity on hand, what I have on purchase orders, how many I have sold in quantity, and dollar value. The last step of this is that we do want to filter this down to only what I have in stock. To do that, I'm going to come over to the Inventory tab, go ahead and customize this, and I can click to add a condition here and specify that I want to only see where quantity available or quantity on hand are less than 1. In this case, in the firearms industry, I recommend quantity available because this does account for anything that's tied up in committed inventory. So I'm going to specify quantity available less than and 1. With this criteria all set up, I can actually save these parameters, just options save, so I don't have to come rebuild this every time. And I name mine inventory stock out, save that report, and this way I can load it back up in just a couple of clicks. You don't have to come rebuild this every time you're in here. Demonstration shown here on how to configure it. I'm going to toggle back over to you, Bart, if you can bring up my sample report, and we will go over some data. All right. So with the report ran and some sample data zoomed in to be more clear visually, what we've run is an item level report for a 1-year sales period, sorted it, ranked it by the quantity sold, and then filter. As I said, you could filter on hand less than 1 or quantity available less than 1. I really like quantity available, but you can do either. What we're seeing here is that these are all items at the top of the report. These items are things that we had significant sales on, but we are absolutely out of stock. So we should be paying attention to this and putting in purchase orders right away to get these items restocked. As well, you may notice There are several items in our quantity on hand with negative values. This is indicative of physical inventory just being out of alignment. So this tells us, hey, we've got a physical inventory problem and we'll need to take some action to correct that. There is a separate webinar and session that we'll talk about later that teaches you how to handle correcting your physical counts.
Cool. Thanks, Sean. So with that, we now know how to run the merchandise analysis report to identify our stockouts. Now let's talk about overstock and understock. Overstock means we've bought too much of it, and so we've got too many dollars and too much floor space committed to a particular type of inventory. And then understock means that we're not sold out of it yet. We're not stocked out, but the stock out is going to come really soon if we don't order some more. And when we're starting to talk about these types of things, what we're really getting into are a lot of inventory measures. And these inventory measures can be intimidating. You've heard terms like inventory turns, safety stock and economic order quantities, open to buy, sell through, GMROI, that's one of my favorites, gross margin return on inventory, and weeks on hand. Again, all of these terms are all about managing inventory. They can be intimidating, and so we're going to make this as simple as possible by focusing on only a single one. And we're going to focus on weeks on hand. And the reason that we elected to focus on weeks on hand is it's the easiest to understand. It estimates, because what it does is it estimates how long will the current on hand last, which is a pretty relevant piece of information to get. And so if your weeks on hand is really high, let's say for instance it says that you have 52 weeks on hand, well that means you currently have in the store enough stock to cover you for an entire year. Those would be candidates to say that they're overstocked. If your weeks on hand is really low, so if you then that would be an indication that you are understocked. So weeks on hand is what we're going to focus on, and let's just take a look at the formula for how it's calculated. Weeks on hand takes your on-hand value, your current on-hand value, and it divides it by your average weekly sales. So for a little bit lower view of this, it takes a current on-hand at a retail value, and then it takes your current sales for a period that you select, and it figures out what average weekly sales are. Now, the period that you could select could be 1 year, just like Sean did in his previous slide. But he also could have said, I only want to look at last month. Calculate my average weekly sales based upon the last month. Now, that might make a lot of sense for things that are fairly seasonal. You could also use this month last year. So let's say it's during the holiday period and you're trying to say, do I have enough ammunition to carry me through the holidays this year? Perhaps the best indicator of that would be this month last year. So at any rate, what it does is it calculates that no matter how many weeks you include, it just comes back and calculates a weekly average, divides on hand by that weekly average, and that will tell us the number of weeks that we are on hand. Now, then one of the nice things about this formula is that it works well either at a category level or at an individual item level. The results are relevant regardless of which level you choose to run the report, and we think that's important. Now, one of the first questions I get when we start talking about weeks on hand is, what should my weeks on hand target be? And the answer is, there's no one answer. I wish that it was easy to say, hey, make sure your weeks on hand is 10 weeks or less, but that's not the case. So you really have to think about your product. And so you could have a different weeks on hand target for different product, and particularly for different categories of product. So let's say that you've got an item that you carry year round, a staple item. So it's not a seasonal item, but a staple item carried year round, and it's got a really high velocity. We sell at least one of this item every single week. Maybe we sell 10 of this item every single week. Maybe we sell 100. But the point is, it's got a high velocity, and we got a fast reorder time that we can get this back. Once we place an order, it only takes 2 weeks for that item to arrive at our store. Well, if the item has this characteristics, I'd say that you'd want to be looking at a target 4 weeks of on hand is all that you really want to have. If you start slipping in much higher than 4 weeks, you're carrying more inventory than you really need to carry. Now, on the other hand, you could have a staple item. Again, we carry it year round, but we only sell one of these per month. Once we sell it, it takes up to 4 weeks for us to get the next one. So an item that fits these characteristics, perhaps a 10 to 15 week on hand would be reasonable. And then for a lot of firearms, and a lot of specialty firearms especially, we might only sell 2 of those per year. And it might take us up to 6 months to get that back in after we've sold it. So for an item that exhibits these characteristics, 52 weeks could be a very reasonable amount of weeks on hand. But since we're having to carry this item considerably longer than we do either of these other 2 items, we need to make sure that our margin is higher because we've got to cover our carrying cost. And then my last example that I want to talk about is a seasonal item. In other words, an item that, that we might sell 1 of per week. It might take us we might order it 5 months in advance, but the season only lasts 3 weeks. We're only going to sell this for 3 weeks. Perhaps an example of this would be something that you're buying for a particular hunting season, or even like a seasonal item such as winter coats and winter hunting coats. They perhaps would have longer than just a 3-week season, but nonetheless, the point applies that it's a season. So with these, we wouldn't want to have but 3 to 5 weeks of supply at the beginning of the season. And by the time we hit the end of the season, we're wanting to see our weeks of supply starting to drop towards 0. If it's not at 0, then we want to mark it down and sell it out. If we find that it's July and we still have a bunch of winter coats in stock, that's a problem. That means that we haven't done the job managing our inventory that we should have, and we probably should have marked those down a little deeper to get those get those cleared out of inventory. So again, the point of this is the weeks on hand that you have a target varies by category. It varies by item type. And so don't get stuck in one thing. More be aware of the type of item, the velocity of which it sells, and how quickly you can reorder it. Those are the things that can control what your weeks on hand should be. Now, I'm not going to talk about all the words on this slide. There's a whole bunch in here, but the point is that this is something that I want to leave with you so that when you're going and starting to run these weeks on hand reports, that you can refer back to this and see what are the important settings. Now, I'm going to show you just a few of them in a live demo. But again, you'll have that as a reference that you can use at a later date. So again, I'm going to go just as Sean did to inventory reports, and then I'm going to click on merchandise inventory. That same screen that Sean reviewed with us pops back up, and I wanted you to focus right now on this analyze by. You have an option to say I want to analyze by item, which is what Sean did a moment ago. Or you could analyze it by group. And if you analyze it by group, then this little field pops up that shows these different ways that we can group it. So we could group it by category. That's the most common way to do it. Or by at the category subcategory level. And you can see there's a number of other different ways that you could choose to group it if you wanted to. So that's our group by. I'm leaving it set at category for purposes of this demonstration. And the other important part is this area here where you're able to define your sales period. Remember, we talked about that. This is where it's going to get your average sales so that it can project how much it is that you're going to need. And so this is where you, for a staple product that you sell constantly year round, you might do all of last year. Or you might say, hey, I need to avoid COVID because things went crazy in COVID. That doesn't represent a normal thing. And so I'm going to forecast based on February of 2019 to February of 2020 so that I avoid March and April because those were crazy months. So that's a different possibility of way to do this. We talked also, you might want to do it for the holidays. And so you might set this for December 1st through January 15th as the period that you want to use. So it doesn't matter what period you use, but think about what it is, what you want to use based on the merchandise that you're doing the weeks of supply info on. And once again, I'll remind you exactly what Sean did. We really like to say, start out with inventory performance. That defaults these columns to some that are pretty good, and then you can eliminate those that you don't really need. So look there's weeks on hand. That's the one that we're after. We can go through here and then say, okay, some of these other things, those aren't important to us, so let's get it off the screen so that we can focus on just exactly what we want to look at. So with that as the setup, we can flip back over and let's look. What I'm going to do now is show you about 4 or 5 reports that are run that help us to manage our inventory using that merchandise analysis report. So this first one that I'm running I'm running it at a category level. I ran it for a period of 1 year. I ranked it by weeks on hand, and I didn't apply any other filter to it. And from this, I have this category level listing that shows me what my weeks on hand are by category. As you might expect, then the ones that have low weeks on hand may be less of a concern, and the ones are less likely to be overstocked, but more likely to be understocked. And the ones that have really high weeks on hand are a really good indicator of things that are likely overstocked. So let's dive in just a little bit deeper. Look at this firearm category. We can see that I've only got 14 weeks on hand of firearms. Now that sounds a little bit low, knowing how long it's taking right now for to replenish our firearms once we sell one. And so I'm sure a lot of you, this is exactly what you're seeing in your data, that you're low on firearms right now, not because you don't want them, but because you can't get them. But this will show you, this will give you a measure to see how, as you're coming more and more in stock, this would hit a more comfortable number, which may be 24 weeks of weeks of supply. Our firearm cases and safes, my best guess is at about 19 weeks of supply that this is being managed pretty well. So there may be some tweaks that you want to do on an item basis on this, but overall, this doesn't show in this sample data that we have that we've got a big problem. But let's look up here in this fishing category. My goodness, we made $8,000 profit all year last year on this category, and we've got almost 2 years of supply left. So we are, at minimum, we are way overstocked in our fishing category. And perhaps we could even say, hey, do we even want to stay in this line? Are we making enough money? Is it worth the hassle? And perhaps what we ought to do is have a big sale on all of this merchandise and clear it out, and then make room wherever that fishing merchandise is to display some other type of merchandise. So I don't know this for sure. We'd have to look in at an item basis, but looking at this category, this would definitely be one, if this were my store, that I would be digging in really deep. I want to show you, just give you one example in this knife category of what it looks like to drill down, to run a merchandise analysis report that's run by item for a particular category, so that we can see, hey, is this 58 weeks of supply good? Or are there things that we can do in this category that could make this run a little bit better? And so, and that's what this report is again, same merchandise analysis report. The difference is I ran it by item. I ran it for a year. I ranked it by weeks on hand, and I filtered it so that I'm only looking at the knife category. And what I can see here is that on all of last year, I sold only one of each of these, and this last one I sold 2 of. But when I look over at my quantity on hand, I see I've got 3 and 2 and 2 and 4. And so based on that sales velocity, I've got well over 2 years of stock on hand. And that is way too much stock. That is money tied up in non-productive stock. And so what we can see is that when we bought this merchandise, that probably wasn't a good idea to get 4 of those. I probably should have only gotten 1. So I'm way overstocked. I know that I could bring my inventory down, reduce my inventory, and still be able to satisfy my customers' demand if by making that adjustment. I should only have 1 on hand, 2 at the max of all of these items. Now, I want to also run this report a different way to show a different flexible thing that we can do to show what items are understocked. So what I did is I ran this at an item level. The sales period that I ran was for 1 year. I ranked it by sales, and I didn't apply any filter at all. So this is for all categories, not just filtered to a single category, but I'm ranking this by sales. And so this is probably the 2nd or 3rd page in the report, and you can see, because I've got this is my item that's ranked 44th among all my items that I sell. And I can see that I've got quantity on hand of 61, that all of last year I sold 54, and so my weeks on hand is 58. I can say with some degree of confidence that I've got plenty of stock of this, if not a little bit of overstock. But my purpose, though, in running this is I'm running this for, let's say, my top 200 items, my top 200 sellers, and I'm looking through here to find where my weeks on hand is really low. Look at this item. I've only got a week on hand of 1 in this, 1.1 of this one. Down at this one, I have only got a weeks on hand of 1.3. So that means within a week to a week and a half, I'm going to be completely out of stock of an item that is in my top 100. And you can see here, my quantity on PO, don't have any of those on order of those 3 items that were problematic. So I think it makes a lot of sense to manage, to keep out of our understock, to run this report once a week, and then do everything you possibly can to say, hey, on my top 200 items, I'm watching it like a hawk. And when I start seeing my weeks of supply drop down to numbers like this, I'm hopping on the phone, doing whatever I can to get us back in stock of those items. Because this is the place that we're going to disappoint customers the most. So with that, those were three different views of the merchandise analysis report. You can see a tremendous amount of flexibility in running those, and how those things can help you do everything from identifying categories we should exit, to identifying items that are overstocked, to identifying items that are understocked, and we need to get back into stock. I'm going to turn it over to Sean to give you just a teaser on replenishment.
Thank you, Bar. So yes, we identified things that we're understocked on. We've identified things that we're completely out of stock on. Now it's time to replenish our inventory. Of course, you can go in, create a purchase order manually, pick up the phone, call your vendor, but know that Counterpoint has the tools to help you with ordering and doing your replenishments. Counterpoint can recommend what you need to order. It can also make recommendations on what your minimum and maximum stocking levels of items should be. You define a minimum quantity, maximum quantity on a per location basis. So if you have multiple stores, you define per store based on that store's performance, how many the lowest level should be, the minimum stocking quantity, and the maximum. Counterpoint does have the tools to equip you and show you this is what we think your minimum and maximum should be based on this sales period, and assign those for you. The very first thing that customers tell me is, I've got 5,000, 10,000 items. I cannot go set a minimum maximum manually one by one. Counterpoint's got the tool to set it for you. And then once this has been configured and your inventory on hand is clean, Counterpoint can give you purchasing advice reports, and with a click, create the purchase request that you can then go edit or tweak, but it builds the purchase request ready to go to the vendor. So I could spend an entire 30 minutes on this. I won't. This is something that we may consider a future webinar for. If it's something that you'd like to see, do email in to rapidcares@rapidpos.com. We'll take it under advisement for another future webinar.
Cool. So yeah, replenishment can be a real time saver for someone if they have discipline with their on hands, and they're really a numbers person. All of you who are listening who are inventory managers or buyers, it always surprises me that people don't know about this particular screen, and so I want to make sure that you know about it. It's called the inventory detail screen. And the thing that I love about this screen is that it allows you to pick and choose the columns and the order of those columns on this report. And there's a lot of different columns that you can pick and choose from. You can export all the data into Excel, so that if you're an Excel guru, you can sort and filter and write formulas and do whatever that you want to do. And this little guy is located in Inventory, Views, Inventory Detail. And the point of him is that in addition to just knowing your item number, etc., you're able to see a lot of different quantities. So your quantity on hand, your quantity committed, which means what things that are on layaway or on special order. What the quantity, there you can see we broke that committed quantity down into what's on layaway, ultimately telling you what your quantity available is, etc., etc. So you can decide what columns that you want and that are most meaningful for you, and then be able to execute all of those, export all of those. I think it's a great window. Play around with it. Those of you who do a lot of inventory management, I think you'll find that you like it a lot. And so we promised to just take up about 30 minutes of your time, and we're at the end. And fortunately, that rolls us right into next steps. So Sean, take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I want to start by saying I appreciate everybody's time today. Of course, everything we talked about has been based on the assumption that your on-hand inventory is accurate. Of course, if you find your on-hand is not accurate, next week we're having a webinar to handle that. So be sure to tune in. Very easy to find if your inventory is not accurate. Go run a merchandise analysis report. Look for those negative numbers. As well, I encourage you to go rewatch this video, configure a set of merchandise analysis specific for your store's reporting needs, and save those off as saved parameters. Revisit this video for assistance on that. If you want some one-on-one personalized time, email into Rapid Cares at Rapid POS and be happy to set up a time to work one-on-one with you and get you the reports you need with the parameters that make sense to you. And lastly, one more time, if when you've got all of this information in front of you, you're ready to automate your replenishment, touch base with us. We're happy to walk you through. And if we hear enough interest on the auto replenishment, we'll hold a webinar on it. So once again, I want to say thank you all for your time today. It's been a pleasure doing this. It's inventory management is actually one of the things I really enjoy doing in Counterpoint.
I echo that too. I think we've got some real strengths there. I hope that each one of you found one nugget or two nuggets that you can take away from this half hour of time that you spent with us, and be able to apply that in your business so that you can be make your business stronger and even more healthy. And hope you and your whole family stays healthy throughout this time. All the best from all of us at Rapid, and look forward to seeing you at next week's webinar. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone for joining, and have a good day. You'll be getting a link to the recording as well as to the presentation shortly. It takes about a half an hour to compile. Thank you.